Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled EDC versus eSource. Is it time to move? My name is Ryan Muse and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will approximately run for 60 minutes. The presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. The webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank CMED, who developed the content for this presentation. CMED Technology is the technology division of CMED Group, with headquarters in Horsham, UK, plus offices in Morrisville, NC, Cambridge, MA, San Bruno, CA, Timisoara, Romania, and Dublin, Ireland. CMED Technology is the developer of Encapsia, an innovative, powerful, next-generation clinical data suite. Encapsia delivers a complete solution to gather and manage data in clinical trials with live insights and analytics on trial progress to inform and support management decisions. Now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Mark Tomlinson, the Senior Director of Technology Operations at CMED Technology. Mark has 30 years of experience in supporting the delivery of clinical trials, with the last 20 years focused on client delivery and adoption of technologies such as EDC and eSource. Mark is a firm believer in collaborative partnerships with clients to appreciate their needs and support achievement of their goals in technology adoption. John Carter, the Product Manager for CMED Technology. John has worked with CMED Technology for almost 15 years. He joined CMED as a database programmer, and for the last 5 years, John has been a product manager, where he lives and breathes the Encapsia Clinical Data Suite. He works closely with both customers and development teams in order to develop the new generational clinical data suite. Katie Rowland, Program Manager for CMED Technology. Katie has worked in the clinical research industry for almost 10 years, with a focus on technology and software delivery for the last 4. Katie has a strong background in electronic patient-reported outcomes and electronic clinical outcomes assessment. She is an Encapsia product expert and works closely with sponsors and sites to adopt the Encapsia Clinical Data Suite, where both eSource and EDC are in use. Now I'd like to pass ourselves over to our first speaker today, John Carter. You may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ryan, for the introductions. The start, it'll be Mark Tomlinson speaking first, not John. So if we can get to the agenda. Great. First, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you all for attending this webinar on the present and future use of EDC and eSource in clinical trials. I'll be kicking off sharing a brief positioning of EDC, and I'll then pass the baton to John Carter to share his view as a product manager of what eSource is, how it's used, with Katie Rowland giving us her experience of running the trials from an operational perspective. We'll be sharing where we see the future is going and also how we're positioned to help us all get there. So, electronic data capture. Yes, this is back in the day. It came to the fore in the late 1990s to replace the traditional NCR, paper CRFs, and all the associated logistics that went along with that. Those of us old enough will remember hours spent splitting NCR CRFs at site, posting, couriering coloured copies to various teams, organising double data entry, faxing query forms, and all the reconciliation, and plenty of other things in there. EDC promised to streamline the workflow and remove a lot of that effort on the way. And to a large extent, it did deliver on that. As the data was entered by site, we no longer needed double data entry. we didn't need to print expensive NCR paper CRFs. As the data was online, we could use electronic data clarification forms. These and other process improvements did give us back time and lowered overall costs, and did help us do more with less. Its success is really evidenced by its ubiquity. It's pretty much become the go-to solution these days. Moving on from the 2000s though, the last 20 years have seen trials grow in complexity, with more data coming from more sources, and the time and cost pressures are not getting any less. So as a quick summary, EDC, it's a mature solution. It's well understood. Everybody knows where its limits are, how it's used. It's an industry standard, and it has delivered efficiencies to the industry. And not to be forgotten, it's not on a critical path to any clinical time frame. By contrast to that, the challenges might include, as a mature solution, where do we go next? Where do we find that next jump in efficiency? Even at the moment, sites are still managing lots of paperwork, and they're using their clinical teams or employing additional staff, both overheads on their day job, and I'm sure you can think of many more. As an industry, there is a need for further adaptation, not unlike the move from double data entry to EDC back in the day, to help us address the challenges and move forward. I'll now hand over to John, who will share with us his thoughts on the use of eSource and its application as a potential solution.
Thank you, Mark. So hello everyone, just to reintroduce myself, I'm John Carter, a product manager at SEMA Technology, and I'm very excited to be speaking with you today. I have a real passion for creating innovative technology that is hopefully going to help drive our industry further forward. Over the next half an hour or so, we're going to move on from what Mark's been explaining to aim to be very informative on the topic of eSource. But just a heads up, we'll also be relating this to our own system and our experience with Incapsia, which is capable of running both EDC and eSource trials. But before we get into eSource itself, let's just remind ourselves of what source data is. So source data is all information in original records or certified copies of original records or clinical findings or observations. And we should also remind ourselves of the key principles surrounding source data. So if you're familiar with this topic, then you may have heard of the Alcoa principle. Now, the FDA defines it as attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. But in more detail, attributable means that data must be associated with the person who created the data. Legible is that all data must be readable and permanent. And contemporaneous, which is my word of the day, is the recording of the data must be at the time when the work took place, and it must be fully timestamped. Original is that it's the first time and place that the data has been recorded, and accurate that they are free from errors, complete, truthful, and reflective of the observation. Now that was what the FDA defined Alcoa as, and then the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, didn't want to be outdone by the FDA, so they added some extra letters, which some refer to as Alcoa Plus. And then they added that source data should also be complete, consistent, enduring, and available when needed. Now that available when needed is quite important when we consider the technology that's used as to start implementing eSource. So how about some examples where Alcoa is not followed? So I'm told it's quite common to see data jotted down on a notepad during testing and then transferred to the approved protocol or form. And then doing this, whether it's for lab results or validation exercise, means that the data is no longer original, contemporaneous, and is potentially now inaccurate. Or another example, when making a correction to information, it's quite common to see the old data has been scribbled out, overwritten, or removed using correction fluid or whiteout. And sometimes this doesn't have an initial or date about who made that correction. So this is meaning that the data is no longer legible, it's no longer original, and the correction is not attributable to a user. And these are examples that are not just relevant to paper trials, but also to EDC. And the idea of eSource allows us to use technology to give a greater adherence to the Alcoa principle, because that technology is specifically designed to adhere to that principle. For example, a system which has got an unavoidable audit trail will mean every data point is fully attributable to the data originator. So before we look into eSource, we have our first quick poll for you. So over to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much. All right, everyone, we've got a poll question that we'd invite you to participate in. You should see it up on your screen now. Our question right now is, what is your familiarity with eSource? Your answers are never heard of it, heard of eSource but never tried it, have tried some eSource, or eSource is all I use. We'll leave this up for a little bit, get everyone some chance to reply. Again, the question is, what is your familiarity with eSource? Got most of the answers in. Give it up for just 5 more seconds and then we'll take a look at the results. All right, perfect. Got quite a lot of responses. Let's take a look at how you answered. So 54% of you said that you have heard of eSource but never tried it. Coming in next is 19% at have tried some eSource. Very close to it at 16% is never heard of it, and 11% eSource is all I use. Thank you very much for your participation. Back to you.
Thank you, Ryan. So let's move on to eSource and explain what that is. So electronic source is clinical data initially collected in an electronic format. Now, I've given many presentation and demos, and some of you may have kind of met me through that. And I've often been known to ask, so what does eSource mean to you? And I've heard many different answers, of which many of them are correct. But the most common answers that I tend to get is that eSource is your eCOA or your ePro data. It's your eConsent or your data that's coming from an electronic health record, an EHR. Or it might be that it's direct data capture. But actually, there are even more types, some of which some may have never actually considered as electronic source, like ECGs, central labs, imaging data, sensors, drug accountability, specialty labs, wearable devices, and the list can go on. So there isn't a single type of eSource data. It actually comes from multiple different sources. Now, a few years ago, the Transcelerate group ran an eSource initiative where they looked at this list of types of eSource, and they split it down into 4 perfectly sensible categories, which we're going to stick with today. And we'll dive into these in some detail. So firstly, there's direct data capture. There's the electronic health records, in particular, the integration and the use of those within an EDC. There's devices and apps, and there is non-CRF data. So we'll look at each of these in some detail, but before we do so, we have another poll question to identify which of these is of most interest to you.
All right, so our next poll question is, as you see up on your screen, of the 4 types of eSource, which is of most interest to you? Now, your answer options are direct data capture, EHR integrations, devices and apps, or non-CRF. So again, the question that you have in front of you is, of the 4 types of eSource, which is of most interest to you? Got it. Everyone's take your chance now to vote. Go ahead and think about that. This is great. A lot of participation. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Let's go ahead and take a look at those answers. Nice. 48% of you have said that direct data capture is of most interest to you. After that, 25% say EHR integrations, 18% at devices and apps, and 9% non-CRF. Thank you very much again for your participation. Back to you.
Thank you, Ryan. So before we look into each of these in some details, I just want to have a look at what the regulatory agencies are saying about eSource. Really, just because we want to make sure that we're not going against what our agencies say. So firstly, the FDA released a paper back in 2013. It was a guidance paper around electronic source data. And in this guidance paper, they state several benefits of running eSource. And some of them include eliminating unnecessary duplication of data, the elimination of transcription of source data. It should facilitate remote monitoring, and let's remember that one. It should promote real-time access for data review. But actually, that wasn't the first paper that was released by a regulatory agency. Back in June 2010, that's almost 10 years ago now, the EMA released a reflection paper around electronic source data as well. And what you can see on my slide is I've also put CDISC, and I fully understand that that's not a regulatory agency, but I've included it there because the EMA paper from 2010 heavily relies upon that paper, and it talks about the 12 user requirements that the CDISC paper references. But then more recently, kind of hot off the press, last year in July, the EMA released their latest qualification opinion on the particular type of eSource of direct data capture. Now, I should note at this point that they state in this paper that it's not definite guidance, but that guidance is currently under development. So we can expect to hear more from the EMA soon. So after reading through these papers, and I had a lot of fun doing so, it is quite clear that our regulatory agencies are talking about eSource and are endorsing it. But to me, that isn't actually the take-home message. The take-home message that eSource is not a new concept. It's been talked about for more than 10 years, and a lot of companies have already begun to tackle the eSource solution. So enough about the regulatory agencies. Now let's dive into the 4 types of eSource and look at them in a bit more detail. So first up, direct data capture. So direct data capture is used to enter data directly into the CRF at the time of data collection. To me, it feels like it's an evolution of EDC, or perhaps even what EDC was actually intended to solve in the first place. In fact, some vendors have repurposed their EDC solution as a direct data capture app or system. And the recent EMA paper from July last year does imply that this is an acceptable solution. So these vendors are using their EDC web-based interface as an acceptable place to enter their data in real time while the subjects are with them. I would have to just question that, does it meet things like the Alcoa principle? For example, if the Alcoa Plus was talking about that the data must be available when needed and that the site must have access to their data at all times, then if it's an online-only web-based interface, then do the site always have that guaranteed connection to the EDC, to the clinical trial data? So there are others for reasons like that have built specifically designed data capture apps, and SEMA technology is one of those. And what we've done is we've built an app that's designed for tablets, so using an iPad, or others use other tablet devices. And what we've done is design a system that is not simply an EDC platform, but it is an interface to allow sites to collect extra information that they would typically collect for the clinical trial. This is to aid site workflow. However, we should also note that in the FDA paper, they do state that only protocol mandated source data should be transferred and accessible to the sponsor. So if we have designed platforms and systems to run direct data capture that allows sites to collect information that belongs to them, then that should not go through to the sponsor. But these apps are also, because they're natively running on tablets, they can have the ability to work offline, meaning that the site will have access to that data at all time. Imagine a site where you've got varying internet connections across different areas. It's important that they can still collect that information even when their internet has dropped. And then these tablets can also be utilized to use the camera and the microphone to start collecting other types of data like photographs or audio clips. And this can enable things like the remote monitoring, which the FDA stated in their guidance is what eSource should allow. But it is also important when selecting your direct data capture system that you consider the study phase and therapeutic area. because there may be some unique considerations. For example, I was recently at a phase 1 unit during a dosing day, and I had never experienced such a hive of activity. Now, the system designed to be used there must never stop the data entry, so it must be fluid and flexible and allow multiple users access to subjects at the same time. Whereas a later phase study may have different considerations. It won't be such intense use at a particular time point, but it may be more patient-based and assessment-based. So for each of these 4 types of eSource, we're going to just list a few of the benefits and challenges. So one of the benefits of direct data capture is that data is available at the time of collection. So it's available, it's entered at the time of collection into the direct data capture system, and as long as those devices are online, they are now available to your data managers and to your monitors to be reviewing the data in near real time if that's what they choose to do. With the lack of transcription, because everything entered is the source, you're going to get 0 transcription errors. But to me, probably the biggest benefit of direct data capture is the improved data quality. So remember that these are systems that are designed for the site. They are also designed to meet the protocol expectations. So as data is being collected, edit checks can be firing in real time as the data is coming in. This is different to the days of paper or even collecting the data directly into EHR systems. They will not be configured to fire protocol edit checks, allowing you to collect the cleanest data possible. As an example, imagine an out-of-range assessment. Now, it may be required that you perform a repeat assessment in that case. If that was done on a piece of paper and transcribed into an EDC a week later, then you may have missed that notification to alert you to perform a repeat assessment. However, with direct data capture, we can build those checks into the system to ensure all data is collected correctly at the time the subject's still at site. Another benefit is that it enables remote monitoring or potentially even removes elements of monitoring. For example, what are you going to be SDVing if things are directly captured? And you can see at the bottom, I've designed these systems are designed for clinical research and not for healthcare, which will make more sense when we look at the EHR section in a minute. But there are challenges. Site resistance is something that we've seen, and this is by no means a criticism of the sites themselves. Sites may have spent years perfecting their process. They may have spent years perfecting the systems that they use and the forms that they use to collect their trial data. But any vendor coming in with a new system is going to potentially cause a headache. As an example, outside of clinical research, I have a 15-month-old son who's got a very severe condition with his limbs called arthrogryposis. And we have been at a hospital many times over the last year and a bit. And every time it's been like a well-oiled machine. We've been in, we've been out, and they've taken really good care of him. But the last time I went, their bookings and appointment system had been replaced by a new IT system. And the whole place was all over the shop. And every appointment that we went to in that visit, we had the doctors and nurses complaining about this new system they're using. Now, it's not because it was a new system and because it doesn't do what they want, it's because it's different. So we get that kind of resistance when we're working with sites, when we're employing and starting to work with what to them is a brand new system. Another challenge can be site training. So with a traditional EDC trial, you may only have a handful of site users that are trained within the EDC system. Those that are entering the data, those that may be responding to queries, and those that the PIs that are performing signatures. But not all site users would require access to the EDC. But with eSource, anyone that's working with the patients and entering data is going to require training. So that's a much larger list. So it's a consideration that needs to be had because these are busy people that we need to train in the technology. And then there's site infrastructure and logistics of managing potentially all this hardware that we're going to be giving them. And how do we make sure there's enough chargers for that? How do we make sure the devices, the tablets, the iPads are all charged before the day starts? So there's definite challenges. I'm now going to pass over to Katie, who's going to give some of our experience with direct data capture.
Thank you, John. So hi, everyone. I'm Katie Rowland, and as was mentioned earlier, I'm a program manager here at CMed Technology. And for each of the 4 categories of eSource, I'm going to be offering a bit of insight into CMed's expertise from a more operational perspective. So at CMed, as mentioned, a part of our Encapsia Clinical Data Suite is our eSource app, which is a direct data capture application used on many studies as of now. And this has allowed us to gain a lot of useful insight into direct data capture. So the eSource app is not simply a repurposing of our EDC app, but rather an iPad app that's designed specifically for sites rather than for the sponsor. As John alluded to, we've had the pleasure of visiting a number of sites, including very busy phase 1 units. And at one site, we even saw as many as 140 users of eSource and 80 iPads, which may sound like quite a nightmare, but it was actually running very seamlessly. So because the eSource application is designed for sites, it doesn't only capture CRF data, but it also allows for sites to capture data specific to their own procedures and SOPs. And because we work so closely with these sites using Encapsia's eSource, we've been able to gather a lot of feedback, which helps us to continually improve our product. Some of this feedback includes that eSource is easy to use. It allows for quick access to queries, so that allowing for those real-time data corrections. Site users appreciate the offline functionality, and they also welcome the shortened data entry time since there's no need for transcription. Some of the challenges that we've heard about from sites include, as John mentioned, that there's a learning curve for a new type of system, which isn't a surprise, and then also that this new system may result in the need for site subject matter experts. So due to Encapsia having both eSource and EDC components, we're able to pull some very interesting metrics to compare the two. So the chart that I'm sharing with you here shows how long it takes a data point to reach its final value. What we're seeing here is that in direct data capture studies, the blue line here, 96% of these data points achieve their final value within 1 second of being entered. Whereas for EDC data, which is represented by the orange line, it takes approximately 6 months to reach the same target, which is 96% of the data points reaching their final value. So it's probably not a surprise, but this data really emphasizes what eSource can achieve. Back to you, John.
Thank you, Katie. So let's move on now and look at the second type of eSource data, and this is electronic health records, or EHRs. So electronic health record systems are already widely used across sites. In fact, some sites may even have multiple EHR systems within it. Other sites, multiple sites might share the same EHR system, but may be created or set up very differently. It's important to state at this time that these EHR systems are not designed for clinical research. They are designed for healthcare, which is why I mentioned that in the previous section. And what we're talking about in terms of using electronic health record data within clinical trials is talking about an integration, an automated integration between that system and our EDCs. But due to the many different EHR systems out there, like I said, even a single institution may have multiple, and their fundamental design is going to bring us challenges in terms of the integration. There's been many attempts over the years to perform these kind of integrations between EHR and EDC, but HL7's latest protocol, the FHIR protocol, we've been looking at it within CMed and feel that it shows incredible promise. I don't think, though, it's just about the technology to highlight the issues that we face. For example, do these EHR systems meet that Alcoa principle? And beyond that, because they're designed for healthcare and not for clinical research, what about 21 CFR Part 11 or GCP? In the 2010 paper, the EMA paper, they state that clinical trials can be conducted at institutions that use electronic health record systems. In that case, the sponsor must assess the systems in use by investigators to determine how well they meet the requirements of GCP. So clearly, back in 2010, the EMA recognized this as a valid type of eSource, which is important for us to remember. But there are also challenges, and that these systems need to be investigated and checked. The benefits of utilising EHR data within EDC is that the data is only entered once. So it's entered directly into the EHR system, and then that data is integrated automatically with the EDC, meaning that there's going to be zero transcription errors. There's zero human manual work between the two systems. And this is obviously going to save time. It's going to save all that data entry time that they're doing to transcribe to EDC. And probably one of the biggest benefits, which is one of the challenges I said about direct data capture, is that sites can utilize their own systems. So there wouldn't be the same need for them to learn a new direct data capture system. And really, with the increase in real-world evidence or real-world data studies, the use of EHR data is only going to be more and more important. But there are challenges. Firstly, there are many different EHR systems, and a lot of these are not using the FHIR standard. A lot of these systems are a lot older and have not been built with FHIR in mind. But again, perhaps the biggest challenge that we face is there's no continuum of regulatory requirements between clinical research and healthcare. For example, an EHR system may not be always storing a full audit trail for every single piece of data that's been entered. It may not have the user that entered it, the timestamp, or every record for changes to those data points. And that comes on to the data quality, where a lot of EHR systems would allow data to be collected in free text or unstructured text. So imagine going to a GP surgery and reporting an event that happened to you. That is often transcribed or written down into the EHR system in free text. But in clinical trials, that will be required to be entered into very specific fields. So integrating between this free text or unstructured text and a structured EDC platform is going to be a challenge. Now, there are tools out there. There is things such as natural language processing that can help, but it is going to be a difficult challenge. Now, it's important to say at this point that although I may have gone on a bit more about the challenges than the benefits, we do see at CMed that the benefits will outweigh those challenges. Being able to utilize sites' own system and data that already exists is only going to help sites get on board with clinical trials. So over to Katie to explain a bit more about our experience.
Thanks, John. So EHR is an interesting area that CMed Technology is actively looking into, but admittedly we are in fairly early stages. One of the beautiful things about the Encasia Clinical Data Suite is that it's designed for integrations of this type, so meaning integrations with systems like electronic health records. So far, we've completed a proof of concept that populates data directly into a CRF using the FHIR standard, and then we're also currently in discussions with additional third-party vendors about other FHIR integrations. Thanks, John.
Thank you. So now let's move on to our third type of eSource data, devices and apps. So you can see from my initial list, there's quite a wide variety of different devices and apps that are used in clinical trials that store and capture electronic data. Firstly, there's ePro and eCOA. There's eConsent. There's wearable devices and sensors. There's medical devices, but also there's things now like medication adherence tracking. I was at a conference only the other day and seeing people's innovations of video cameras taking a video of a patient taking a study drug. Now, all of this is storing electronic data that can be utilized in the clinical trial. The thing that I think excites me most about this category of data is they tend to be focused around patient centricity. If you take eConsent data, the concept behind eConsent is to replace the rather tedious informed consent process where maybe a PI reads out a long list of things to a patient. eConsent is normally tablet-based and very informative. It may have videos, it may have questionnaires, and it will encourage the patient to make sure that they fully understand everything about that clinical trial. Or take wearable devices and sensors. It enables subjects to start using wearable devices instead of maybe filling out long questionnaires. It enables us to run trials in patients' homes rather than at sites. But the use of all of this data means that there's a potential for a very high volume of data within a clinical trial. Just take a wearable device, an actigraph like a Fitbit. A single device can collect 1 million data points very easily over the course of a day, let alone a week or a month. So what do we do with that high volume of data? And we have to ask ourselves, okay, what now belongs in the eCRF or in the EDC system? Is it that full time series raw data, or is it just the analysis of it and the key data points? So the benefits of using devices and apps are that it's a very rich source of data. So there's huge amounts of it. There is, like I said, e-consent, there's e-pro, which are collected from patients. There is wearables and sensors. There is so much out there that we can utilize. It allows us to potentially start automating time-consuming methods. As an example, at CMed, we've been involved with a trial where we are calculating patients' pain based on the gait in their walk, which we've been able to identify through wearable devices and sensors. And this was to replace the need for asking questionnaires, patients' long questionnaires, to collect what we decided their pain would be. So we're using wearable technology to automate that time-consuming method that we were forcing upon the patient. But really, again, the biggest benefit is generally this category of eSource data is really to benefit the patient, is to make the trial easier for them, as well as obviously giving us huge amounts of high quality data. Some of the challenges, there's infrastructure challenges, and there's cost and budget concerns, particularly around the software and the hardware. And we're not just talking about the devices themselves, but the software licenses for things like e-consent. And then there is probably my most important challenge here is the regulatory challenges and the uncertainties. For example, how can we determine that all the devices used, like a wearable sensor, are all calibrated the same? How can you be sure that a device has not been put onto a patient's pet rather than wear it themselves? And I'm being slightly silly now, but there are all these kind of challenges and things that make people nervous when they're starting to collect this kind of data. So Katie's going to just share some more of our thoughts.
Thanks, Joan. So the use of these sensors and wearables in clinical trials is relatively new, so we haven't had quite as much opportunity to explore this area as others. However, the Encapsulate eSource app has been used successfully on studies to help with some of the challenges of linking these wearable device activities to specific patients, dates, and times. So while the it's designed for integration for other systems such as ePro solutions. And we've already proven to integrate seamlessly with many other systems. These include multiple e-consent platforms. We've done a deep integration with a leading randomization and trial supply management vendor. And we've also integrated with a sample tracking or medicine supply chain management platform. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Katie. And then so on to our final category of eSource data. So this is non-CRF data, and you may have wondered when I read this out at the start what I was referring to. And this is really data that comes from other sources. It's central labs, it's imaging, it's ECG, it's PK data. And as I say this, I can almost hear the penny drop, that this is data that you've probably been collecting and using for years and maybe not even considered to be eSource data. So it's not a new concept. But I have seen over my time in the industry, it's about 15 years now, the quantity of that third-party data has only increased. There's more types of it, and even the types of it that already existed have increased in their quantity. So EDC systems have been handling this non-CRF data for many years, but a lot of them are struggling now to keep up with the quantity of data and are unable to handle it. In addition, there is still lots of manual processes required in managing this data. If you consider third-party data and uploading it into the EDC system, a typical way that it may be handled is that a vendor may create a data file. They may upload it to a server. It may be downloaded by the sponsor, forwarded to a CRO, and then uploaded into the EDC system by a data manager. Why are there all of these chains when it could actually be managed automatically by the vendor themselves? Or then there's the reconciliation that's also very manual. Your eCRF will contain what data you're expecting to load, and then the loaded data will contain what has been loaded. And the process for reconciliation can take a lot of time. But is it time for our industry to start automating some of this for the technology that's available to us today? So some of the benefits of non-CRF data is that it's a very rich source of data, similar to the wearable, to the devices and the apps. There is no data transcription when you're talking about third-party data loads. It's very accurate and it will save time. So if you consider the difference between local labs and central labs, where local labs is typically transcribed and central labs is normally uploaded, to transcribe a local lab is going to be error prone because you're entering large quantities of data, and it's going to take quite a lot of time for skilled people at sites to do. Whereas we're able to utilize central lab data more, then we're going to have less of that transcription, therefore giving us better and more accurate data. And then some of the challenges is that, as I've already kind of alluded to, there is a time-consuming reconciliation process. I have personally seen data managers reconciling listings from the EDC against listings of the actual third-party data to ensure that everything that we expected to be loaded was actually loaded and there was nothing missing. And that's taken them a long time, but there is technology available now to ensure that that process is automated. There is the manual process of the upload that I've already gone through. And actually, as an industry, we seem to all implement the third-party data uploads differently. I've worked with many sponsors, and the central lab data file is typically always the same, but may come through in a different format, may come through with different columns, different variables, and therefore it means that the time to set up and create takes a lot longer. So Katie is going to share our thoughts.
Sure. So as John mentioned, all of these types of non-CRF data aren't a new concept, and at CMed we've been handling this type of data for many years. Most recently, we've put additional effort into technology to aid in the handling of all of these different types of non-CRF data. So Siemens' response to this need is Incapsia's purpose-built loader application, which is not only designed for loading non-CRF data, but also to address some of the associated industry challenges. So firstly, our loader app includes access to self-service lists. So as data are multiple sets of hands, we're able to provide the tools needed for sites to load data themselves. Our loader app is also inclusive of automated load endpoints. So this enables vendors to automatically push their data files to the Incapsia server, and this can be automatically run as frequently as required, for example, once a week, once a day, every hour. The third item on the list here is automated reconciliation in the case of missing or extra records. So Incapsia provides tools to enable a lot of the reconciliation to be automated. For example, as data is loaded, records can be marked as unexpected or missing to allow for easier actioning of these items. And lastly, our loader app allows for the import of standardized schemas. Fortunately for those of us who aren't as technically inclined, no programming skills are required to create a loader schema within Incapsia. The loader schemas created can be reused across multiple studies. Back to John.
Thank you, Katie. So we've looked at these 4 different categories of eSource. So now let's maybe ask ourselves some potentially difficult questions. And I'm going to state at this point that these are my opinions, and actually we may all have a different one. So my first difficult question that I want to ask is this the end of EDC? And my opinion is that no. Well, at least it's not yet. So with all the challenges of these 4 types of eSource to overcome, it seems like we are still quite some way off from all trials being able to run a full eSource approach. Let's just take one of these types of eSource into account, those EHR integrations. Until FHIR is a more widely adopted protocol by each of the EHRs, then integrations are going to need to be set up manually for each system. And even then, with such variety and difference in clinical research to healthcare, it does feel like we're still quite a long way off from this being a complete solution for every single site. Is there a single eSource answer? So as a product manager who, to be honest, 5 years ago may have been a little naive on this topic of eSource, I was someone who believed our direct data capture app was that eSource answer. So I'd love to have been able to say yes and that we've already got it. But we, the industry, we're just not quite there yet. As we've explained, eSource is not just about direct data capture. eSource is about all types of data that is being collected initially in an electronic format. We think EHR integrations are going to be key to developing this full eSource approach. And as we've explained, this is still some way off from being a scalable solution. We should also consider that for direct data capture, you still need to get that data into the EHR system. And some sites accept, or a lot of sites accept, the PDF archives as a valid input into their EHR. But the most recent paper by the EMA of July last year does state that this should be a real-time integration from the direct data capture into the EHR system, which means we're going to have a similar problem as extracting the data from the EHR as it is to get it back into the EHR. So can eSource and EDC be used in the same study? Well, it depends on the system in play, and a little plug here, but within Capsia, we absolutely can. So within one system, we have both a purpose-built direct data capture app and a purpose-built EDC app. This means that it's one trial configuration to create your CRF that's used for both direct data capture and EDC. But there are other considerations. It's not only about the technology. So for example, just as an example, it's got to be clearly defined in the protocol what data is eSource and what's EDC. So even before these CRFs are built within whatever system you choose, there should be a clear understanding and picture of how the data is going to be collected. And are there times and places for EDC and eSource? So absolutely, I believe there is. eSource is applicable to all phases and therapeutic areas. However, there may be times where it's better suited than others. Consider a large late phase trial with 100 sites across many countries. Creating an EHR integration for these sites, particularly those that don't support the FHIR standard, would be a monumental effort. So perhaps in these cases, at least for the time being, it's better suited for these sites to implement an EDC. Or maybe across the whole trial, a hybrid approach where some sites are doing EDC and some sites are doing direct data capture. So where do we see the future? As I already said, this is not the end of EDC, at least it's not at the moment. It's going to be around for a while yet. Just look at the time that it took us to get EDC as the main system. But we're going to start to see more and more of these 4 categories of eSource data being utilized as source data. We need to stop thinking in terms of an EDC system and maybe consider that EDC systems are more like clinical data suites, where EDC is just a single part. We do believe that eSource is going to be the future of clinical trials, but it's not as simple as just saying eSource as direct data capture is that future. We see the future as being a mix of all of these different categories, where it's all collected and unified within one unified system. Over time, we expect EDC to be used less and less, until all the data is captured and utilized from electronic sources. There won't be a sudden switch where we suddenly move to eSource, but it's more of an evolving where EDC will begin to take a back foot. But in the immediate future, we need systems that can start introducing each of these 4 categories of eSource while still supporting EDC. Which brings me on to my final little plug about Incapsia. We purposely try not to call Incapsia an EDC system, and we try not to call it an eSource system, a direct data capture system, because it is so much more than that. We call it a clinical data suite, which happens to be capable of EDC and of eSource. We have a purpose-designed EDC app and a purpose-designed direct data capture app that runs on iPads and is designed for the sites rather than the sponsors. Every single change to a data point is fully audit trailed with a reason for change, the user making the change, and the date and time of that change. In addition, Incapsia is also capable of storing the origin and source of every data point that is collected So imagine a trial where some sites are doing regular EDC, some are trying our eSource direct data capture app, and others are integrating EHR within the Encapsia eCRF. Every data point is marked with its origin and source, so you can gain a full picture and trace every data point back to its original source. This information can then be surfaced to the monitor, allowing us to display which data points require SDV because they are transcribed or entered through EDC. So we have our own purpose-built EDC, a purpose-built direct data capture app, and an innovative approach, as Katie explained, to the non-CRF data loads. But we're not going to stop here. The suite is going to continue to expand in the years ahead to tackle even more of the devices and apps category of eSource. In the meantime, Encapsia is able to easily integrate with other vendors. To demonstrate this, we've created multiple integrations, including one deep or hyper integration with an RTSM or IRT vendor, which surfaces the RTSM, the randomization of trial supply management functionality within the Encapsia interface. So we have designed Encapsia to run trials of today, but to be ready for how trials will be run in the future. As we've said several times, EDC is going to be around for quite some time yet, and Encapsia is still capable of running those run-of-the-mill EDC studies. And we have no plans to stop supporting, and we have no plans to stop trying to innovate EDC technology. But in addition, we are offering eSource functionality natively within Encapsia or through our integrations. And I firmly believe that this is an exciting time for clinical trials. So before I pass back to Mark to summarize what we've discussed today, we have one final poll for you. So over to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much. And for our final poll, what we're looking at and what we're asking is, when are you thinking of using eSource? Your answers for potential here are immediately, within the next 6 months, more than 6 months, I'm fine with EDC, or unsure. The question again is, when are you thinking of using eSource? We'll leave it open for about 10 more seconds. Just give everyone a chance to think about their answer, decide their answer as they believe that is most likely to happen for when they're thinking of using eSource. All right, so we'll just close this poll off now and take a look at what your responses were. Here we are at 39%. Most of you said you were unsure. 22% said within the next 6 months, and very closely behind at 20%, more than 6 months. 15% came in at immediately, and 4% at I'm fine with EDC. Thanks for participating. Back to you.
Great, thank you, Ryan. So, thanks, John and Katie, for opening a window into the world of eSource and the potentials that this can offer. So, to close out, we do think EDC has a place in the data capture landscape of the future, but it will probably share the limelight with other options. As we've seen, it's not new. You've probably been using it for years. But we are seeing an uptick of interest in direct data capture as the industry tries to adapt to the various pressures of clinical trials today. As John alluded to, there doesn't appear to be a single solution that can do everything. There are certainly best of breed suppliers that do single things very well. But that brings inherent challenges as well. How do you bolt them together efficiently? How do you make the process work? How do you ensure everything ties together? And with trial complexity and competition for patients increasing, the site experience will no doubt become far more important to a successful trial. And as John described, the scope of options under the banner of eSource gives us a very clear way forward to gain further efficiencies over and above the current state we are with EDC. It's not really something for the future, it's here now. So I'll leave you with the question, is it time to move to eSource? Thank you all for listening, and we'll now look to answer some of your questions. Over to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much for that wonderfully insightful presentation. And now I'd like to invite the audience to continue to send their questions or comments right now using that questions window for the Q&A portion of this webinar. I've already received some questions, so I'll go ahead and start with those. Our first question says, it's a question for Katie. When using direct data capture, DDE, is there any concern from the sites that they need to enter much of the data redundantly into both the DDE application and the EHR, EMR at the site? Katie, are you there?
I can take this if Katie's having some microphone problems. No, there is no need to duplicate the data entry. So the Encapsula interface will allow for the initial source to be collected. And then we have solutions such as an archiver app that allows you to export all of the patient data into PDFs. As far as I'm aware, all EHR systems allow you to store external documents like PDFs, and so far that's been a perfectly acceptable solution. But as I said in one of my wrap-up slides about this, is that the recent guidance from the EMA, the paper from last year, implies that we should also be building basically a two-way integration and send the data in real time to those EHR systems as well. So there's definitely room for improvement that so far we've always been able to upload through the PDFs.
Thank you very much. Another question we have here is, how could eSource be used in siteless trials?
Yes, so it's a good question, and it's part of the whole patient centricity part. So I personally believe that direct data capture apps like our own that has got this offline capability are perfectly positioned for running siteless trials. The devices themselves, they're not tethered to a physical location. They work fully offline, so why not take them on the road? And we within CMed have plans to start doing so and running these kind of trials, where the investigator or the study nurse or the study coordinator is able to take our direct data capture app or maybe a tweaked version of it to the patients themselves.
Excellent, thank you for that answer. Another question we have is, does Encapsula integrate with lab information systems?
So the short answer here probably is that Encapsula will integrate with any system that you like within reason. So, I mean, I'm not familiar myself with lab information systems, but we have integrated with lab vendors to import the data from that platform directly into the Encapsula system. So, as an example, Encapsula's got a REST API that allows us to provide endpoints to the labs for them to automatically process and send their data files to.
Thank you very much. Another question we have here is, when using offline data entry through tablet, what would be the audit trail of data capture into EDC?
So as I explained in one of my summaries, we try not to think of Encapsula as an EDC or as an eSource solution. It is a clinical data sweep that is capable of both eSource and EDC. Also, I mentioned that within every single data point, we're able to store the origin and the source of that data. So if it's been transcribed through EDC or whether it's come through our direct data capture app, it's all very clearly indicated within the user interface to the users, to the data managers, to the monitors of where and how that data's come in.
Thank you very much for your question, or for your answer to that question. I think that though brings us to the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. Now, if we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at CMed may follow up with you afterwards, or if you have further questions, you can direct them to the email address on your screen right now. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You'll be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive of this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, I'm about to send you a link in the chat box, and you'll be able to view the recording of this event on that page. And you can also share this link with your colleagues. when they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join us in thanking Mark Tomlinson, John Carter, and Katie Rowland, our speakers for today. We hope that you found this webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone.